November the 9th, 1958. British petroleum geologist Ronald Maclean pilots his DC-3 survey plane across the desolate Libyan desert, scanning the endless expanse of sand and rock for signs of oil deposits. Then he sees something impossible. 440 miles inland from the Mediterranean coast in one of the most remote and hostile deserts on Earth sits an aircraft. Not wreckage scattered across the dunes, but an intact bomber sitting upright as if it had simply landed and been abandoned. Maclean circles lower. Through binoculars, he can make out details. A 4-engine bomber, American markings still visible, despite years of sun and sand. The name painted on the fuselage is still legible. Lady Be Good. When Maclean reports the discovery, officials at Wheelus Air Force Base are skeptical. No American aircraft is recorded as missing in that area. But when a ground team finally reaches the site in March 1959, they find something that defies explanation. The Lady Be Good, a B-24 Liberator bomber that vanished on April 4th, 1943, during its very first combat mission, has been sitting in the desert for nearly 16 years, and she's in perfect condition. The machine guns still work. The radio still functions. There's still coffee in a thermos. Water containers are still full. One of the engines starts up at the turn of a key. It's as if the crew had just stepped away moments ago. But the crew is gone. And when searchers finally locate their bodies scattered across 109 miles of desert, they uncover one of World War II's most tragic and mysterious stories, a tale of navigation error, impossible survival, and a diary that documents the final 8 days of men who walked farther through the Sahara than experts believed humanly possible. Today we're exploring the mystery of Lady Be Good and the ghost bomber that time forgot. April 4th, 1943. Salak Airfield, Libya. The sun beats down on the North African coast as 25 B-24D Liberator bombers prepare for a high-altitude bombing mission against harbor facilities at Naples, Italy. Among them is the Lady Be Good, a brand-new bomber assigned just 10 days earlier to the 514th Bomb Squadron, 376th Bomb Group, 9th Air Force. The plane, bearing serial number 41-4301, had been named after a popular George Gershwin song. Her crew is equally green. They'd arrived in Libya only a week ago on March 18th. This would be their first combat mission together. First Lieutenant William J. Hatton, pilot 24 from Whitestone, New York. Second Lieutenant Robert F. Toner, co-pilot 26 from North Attleboro, Massachusetts. Second Lieutenant D.P. Hayes, navigator 23 from Lee's Summit, Missouri. Second Lieutenant John S. Warovka, bombardier 22 from Cleveland, Ohio. Technical Sergeant Harold J. Ripslinger, flight engineer 32 from Saginaw, Michigan. Technical Sergeant Robert E. Lamott, radio operator 21 from Lake Linden, Michigan. Staff Sergeant Guy E. Shelley, gunner 23 from Dunkirk, Indiana. Staff Sergeant Vernon L. Moore, gunner 20 from New Boston, Ohio. Staff Sergeant Samuel E. Adams, gunner 22 from Craig, Missouri. 9 young men, mostly in their early 20s, about to fly their first combat mission. They were nervous but confident. The mission seemed straightforward. Fly 700 miles to Naples, drop bombs on the harbor, return to base. Total flight time, about 6 hours. But from the beginning, nothing went as planned. The squadron was supposed to take off in waves, with later departures catching up to form a protective bomber formation. A severe sandstorm rolled across Salak as the bombers prepared to launch. Several aircraft aborted immediately. The sand could destroy engines. Lady Be Good's engines ingested sand during takeoff, but they seemed to be running normally. Lieutenant Hatton made the fateful decision. They would continue the mission. At 2:50 p.m., Lady Be Good lifted into the storm and headed north toward Naples. The flight to Naples was plagued by problems from the start. Strong tailwinds, and some estimates suggest winds of 60 to 90 mph, pushed Lady Be Good off course and accelerated her far beyond normal cruising speed. The bomber became separated from the formation. Course corrections were attempted, but by the time they neared Naples, the other B-24s had already bombed the target and departed. Adding to their troubles, visibility was terrible. Cloud cover obscured the ground. The inexperienced crew struggled to identify landmarks. When they finally approached the Naples area around 7:50 p.m., they couldn't locate the target through the clouds. With no way to bomb accurately and no formation to join, Lieutenant Hatton made another fateful decision. Abort the mission. They dumped their bombs into the Mediterranean Sea and turned for home. At approximately 8:12 p.m., Lady Be Good radioed Benina Airfield requesting a directional reading. The HF-DF, High Frequency Direction Finding Station, gave them a bearing of 330 degrees from Benina. That last radio transmission would be the final contact anyone had with Lady Be Good. My ADF has malfunctioned, requesting DF bearing. Over. The crew thought they were on course for home. They were flying at a high altitude above cloud cover in darkness. Below them, they assumed, was the Mediterranean Sea, but those strong tailwinds that had pushed them toward Naples so quickly, they were still blowing. Lady Be Good wasn't approaching the Libyan coast from the north. She had already crossed the coastline and was now flying deep into the Sahara Desert, in the darkness, flying above clouds with no visual reference to the ground and malfunctioning navigation equipment. The crew had no idea they were flying in the wrong direction. As Lady Be Good flew south into the desert, the crew believed they were still over the Mediterranean, approaching the coast. Why didn't they realize their mistake? Several factors contributed to the tragedy. The clouds. Flying at high altitude above solid cloud cover, they couldn't see the ground. The desert below looked no different than ocean through clouds and darkness. The ADF. Malfunction. The automatic direction finder was their primary navigation tool for homing in on the base. Without it, they were navigating by dead reckoning, calculating position based on time, speed, and direction. But they didn't know about the extreme tailwinds that had altered their ground speed. Inexperience. This was the crew's first combat mission. They'd never flown this route before. Everything was new and unfamiliar. The confirmation bias? They expected to be over water. When they looked down and saw nothing but darkness below the clouds, their expectations reinforced the error. It must be the Mediterranean. Around midnight, after flying for approximately 4 hours since leaving Naples, the crew expected to be approaching or passing over the Libyan coast. They should have been seeing base lights, hearing radio signals, preparing to land. Instead, they saw nothing, just darkness. Confusion set in. Where was the coast? Where was the base? Why couldn't they raise anyone on the radio? The fuel gauges dropped lower and lower. Finally, around 2 a.m. on April 5th, 1943, the reality became inescapable. They were lost, running out of fuel and out of options. Lieutenant Hatton gave the order that every pilot dreads, prepare to bail out. At approximately 2 a.m., 9 men jumped from Lady Be Good into the darkness, each believing they were parachuting into the Mediterranean Sea. Imagine their terror. They were jumping into what they think is ocean in the middle of the night. They're expecting to hit water. Instead, they slam into hard desert ground. 8 men landed relatively close together. One man, Bombardier Lieutenant John Warovka, landed some distance away and died on impact, probably from a parachute malfunction or a hard landing. His body would be found years later near the crash site. The 8 survivors gathered in the darkness. They assessed their situation and made an inventory. 1 parachute, they pooled their chutes for materials, a few canteens of water, emergency rations, a .45 caliber pistol with 50 rounds, first aid kits, flashlights, flight jackets, and crucially, Lieutenant Robert Toner had grabbed his diary before jumping. As dawn broke, the men realized the horrifying truth. They weren't near the Mediterranean coast. They were in the middle of an endless desert, with no idea where they were or which direction to walk. But they had no choice. They couldn't stay at the landing site with no water and no shelter in the scorching desert sun. They decided to walk north, hoping to find the coast, or at least civilization. What followed was an ordeal that desert survival experts later deemed impossible. Lieutenant Robert Toner kept a diary during those 8 days. When his body was discovered in 1960, the diary was found among his personal effects. His entries, written with sober brevity, document the crew's final days. Sunday, April 4, 1943. Naples, 28 planes, things pretty well mixed up. Got lost returning, out of gas, jumped, landed in a desert at 2 hour in morning. No one badly hurt. Can't find John. All others present. Monday, April 5. Start walking NW. Still no John. A few rations, 1-2 canteen of water, 1 cap full per day. Sun fairly warm. Good breeze from NW. Night very cold. No sleep. Rested and walked. Tuesday, Überflogings. Rested at 11:30. Sun very warm. No planes. Walked and rested. 50 NW. Slept of and on till 3 a.m. Wednesday, August 7. Cut chute and kite. Put water in cap. 8 Oz bottle, a few drops per man, sun very warm, can't sleep, everyone getting weak, prayers all the time, again P-38s went over, sent up shoot, too weak to walk. Sam and Moore separate, 118 mining ore in the head, rest of crew together, 1 P2 can of water left. Thursday, Apert 8. Still having prayer meetings for help, no sign of anything, a couple of birds, good wind from NW. Real weak now, can't walk, pains all over, still all together. Shelley, Rip, Lamont, nearing end, maybe today, no help yet. 5 p.m., starting to get dark. Friday, April 9. No help yet, very cold nighty. Saturday, April 10th. Still alive. Sunday, April 11th. No help yet. Monday, April 12th, no entry. On the 8th day, Lieutenant Toner's diary entries cease. One by one, the men succumbed to dehydration and exposure. When Lady Be Good failed to return on April 4th, 1943, the military launched a search and rescue operation, but they searched in entirely the wrong place. Everyone assumed the bomber had gone down in the Mediterranean. Search planes scoured the waters between Libya and Italy. Ships patrolled the coast, but they found nothing. After several days, the search was called off. Lady Be Good and her 9-man crew were declared lost at sea, presumed killed in action. Letters were sent to families, missing in action over the Mediterranean. The men were mourned. Life moved on. World War II continued for another 2 years, claiming millions more lives. 9 missing airmen and 1 lost bomber became a footnote, one small tragedy among countless others. For 15 years, Lady Be Good remained where she crashed, 440 miles inland from the coast, utterly alone in the vast Sahara. In November 1958, British petroleum geologist Ronald McLean was conducting aerial surveys over the Libyan desert, searching for potential oil deposits. Flying at low altitude across the Kalanchio sand sea, he spotted something that made him do a double take. An aircraft, intact, sitting in the middle of nowhere. He circled back and took photographs. When he reported the discovery to Wheelus Air Force Base, officials were skeptical. No American planes were recorded as missing in that region, but they noted the location on maps for future reference. Over the following months, other oil survey teams spotted the wreckage multiple times. Finally, in March 1959, a ground team led by British oil surveyor Gordon Bowerman drove out to investigate. What they found was extraordinary. The Lady Be Good had belly landed on a flat gravel plain. The stress of the landing had broken the fuselage just behind the main wings, but the aircraft was otherwise remarkably intact. It had skidded almost 700 yards before coming to rest. The desert's extreme dryness had preserved everything. There was no rust, no decay. The plane looked like it had crashed weeks ago, not 16 years. When investigators arrived, they found the .50 caliber machine gun still worked. They test-fired one. The radio was still functional. One of the engines could still be started. Containers were still filled with water. A flask still contained drinkable coffee. Personal belongings were undisturbed, clothes, logbooks, photos. The navigator's charts and logs were intact and legible, but there were no bodies, no parachutes. The crew had clearly bailed out. The question became, where were the men? In 1960, the U.S. military launched an extensive search for the crew's remains. Desert survival experts predicted that without proper supplies, the men could have walked perhaps 20-30 miles maximum before succumbing to heat and dehydration. In February 1960, a British petroleum survey team discovered 5 bodies clustered together about 80 miles northwest of the crash site. The remains were identified as Lieutenant Hatton, Lieutenant Toner, Lieutenant Hayes, Sergeant Ripslinger, and Sergeant Shelley. 80 miles. The men had walked 80 miles through the Sahara Desert with minimal water and no preparation. Experts were astounded. It shouldn't have been possible, but the search wasn't over. 4 men were still missing. In August 1960, searchers found the body of Sergeant Lamont 108 miles north of the crash site. He had walked farther than any of the others, an almost superhuman feat of endurance. Sergeant Moore's remains were discovered 78 miles from the crash site. Bombardier Lieutenant Warovka's body was found near the original Bailout area. He had died on impact. That left 1 man unaccounted for, Staff Sergeant Samuel Adams. Despite extensive searches, his body was never recovered. The Sahara had claimed him completely. The personal effects recovered from the bodies told a story of desperation and faith. Prayer books, religious medals, photographs of loved ones. These men had faced death knowing it was coming, sustained only by hope in each other. The story of Lady Be Good is one of the most haunting mysteries of World War II, not because we don't know what happened, but because we do. 9 young men on their very first combat mission made a series of small errors that cascaded into catastrophe. Strong winds, a malfunctioning navigation instrument, cloud cover, darkness, inexperience. Each factor alone might have been survivable. Combined, they were fatal. The crew bailed out thinking they'd land in water. Instead, they found themselves in one of Earth's most hostile environments. And instead of giving up, they walked. For 8 days, they walked, covering distances that desert survival experts still consider nearly impossible. The Lady Be Good sat in the desert for 15 years, perfectly preserved, a ghost bomber waiting to tell her story. When she was finally found, she became a time capsule, a window into that final mission that ended in tragedy. Today, parts of a Lady Be Good are displayed at museums, including the U.S. Air Force Museum and the Quartermaster Museum at Fort Lee, Virginia. Her story has inspired books, documentaries, and even a 1960 Twilight Zone episode called King 9 Will Not Return. But the real memorial is in the remembrance of 9 men who refused to give up. William Hatton, Robert Toner, D.P. Hayes, John Waravka, Harold Ripslinger, Robert Lamont, Guy Shelley, Vernon Moore, and Samuel Adams. They walked 109 miles through hell, sustained by hope, faith, and brotherhood. That they died doesn't diminish their courage. That they tried, that they kept walking when every step was agony, makes them heroes. The Lady Be Good found her way home eventually. So did her crew. They rest together now, their story finally told, their sacrifice finally understood. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more World War II mysteries, and let me know in the comments what strikes you most about Lady Be Good's story. Until next time, remember, courage isn't about surviving the impossible, it's about trying.